Gennady Modestovich Mikhasevich's life is a dark and terrifying story that unfolded across the rural villages of Belarus during the Soviet era. He was a serial killer who murdered at least 36 women between 1971 and 1985. In his own confession, the number reached 43, while estimates suggest it could be more than 55. His story, from birth to death, reflects a psychological downfall, a life of social deception and horrifying crimes. Though based on historical facts, it is told as a narrative, allowing the listener to grasp the deeper layers of his life. Gennady was born on April 7, 1947, in the village of Ist, located in the Vitebsk Oblast of Belarus. Then part of the Belarusian SSR, it was a small rural settlement where life was harsh and marked by poverty. His father was an alcoholic and abusive man who often brought violence into their home. Gennady's childhood was deeply scarred by this constant abuse. In school, other children mocked him because of his father, calling him the drunkard son and laughing at him. These taunts left a deep mark on his personality. He grew into a quiet, lonely, and introverted child. Girls kept their distance, and he struggled to even speak to them. His mother, who was likely a victim of abuse herself, showed him a little sympathy, but the toxic home environment left him psychologically fragile. In those years, rural life in the Soviet Union was harsh. People worked in the fields, and education was limited. Gennady received only a basic education, but his real focus was coping with his loneliness rather than studying. He often wandered alone through the forests, lost in his own thoughts. This isolation later became the foundation of his crimes. As a child, he had no real friends and remained detached from society. A quiet anger began to grow within him, directed especially toward women, perhaps because he had always faced rejection from them. As Gennady grew older, he was drafted into the Soviet army. This was the late 1960s, a time when military service was mandatory in the Soviet Union. Life in the army was even harsher for him. The strict discipline and the rough behavior of his fellow soldiers pushed him deeper into introversion. During this time, however, he made contact with a young woman named Elena, his first romantic experience. They exchanged letters, and for a while Gennady felt that maybe life could hold something good for him after all. But when he returned from the army a year later, he found out that Elena had married someone else. The news hit him like a bolt of lightning. He set off from Vitebsk to Polotsk, intending to commit suicide. On the way, he bought a rope so that he could hang himself. But on the night of May 14th, 1971, when he got off the bus, he met a 19-year-old girl, Lyudmila Andalova. She was also alone, and Gennady, seeing her, decided to take out his anger. He dragged her, raped her, and strangled her to death with his hands. He hid the body in a nearby garden. He later admitted that the murder brought him peace, and he abandoned the idea of suicide. This was the beginning of his criminal life. This first murder gave him a new sense of power. He would later say that watching women struggle gave him pleasure. In October 1971, he attacked another woman, but she survived. He put a noose around her neck, but she fought back, grabbed his hands, bit him, and screamed. Gennady panicked and ran away. She became the only surviving victim. In 1972, he murdered 2 more women near Vitebsk. His crimes were only just beginning, even as he tried to present a normal life. In 1973, Gennady graduated from the Vitebsk Technical School and returned to his village of Ist, where he began working on a Soviet collective farm. Later, he took a job at an auto repair shop, which gave him access to cars. He owned a small red Zaporozhets, a car that would later play a role in his crimes. Outwardly, he built the image of a model citizen. He joined the Communist Party, served as a local party functionary, and even volunteered with the People's Druzhina, a civilian force that assisted the police. To the outside world, he appeared responsible, sober, and devoted to family life. In 1976, he married and eventually had 2 children. But all of this was just a mask. Behind the facade, he was a disturbed man, filled with anger toward women. On the surface, his married life looked normal, but in reality, he would give his wife belongings taken from murdered women as if they were gifts. His crimes continued in secret. He often picked up hitchhiking women, drove them into remote forests, assaulted them, and strangled them. Once, when a woman mocked his shy personality in a nightclub, he killed her in rage. In another attack, when his attempt to strangle a victim failed, he grabbed scissors from her handbag and stabbed her. After that, he always made sure his strangling method was tight and effective. His methods were simple. He never carried weapons, instead using whatever was available at the scene. Once he strangled a victim with a piece of rye rope. Most of his victims were young women, often traveling alone through the rural countryside. Between 1971 and 1985, he carried out his murders across Vitebsk, Polotsk, and the surrounding areas. In 1984 alone, he killed between 12 and 14 women, his most active year. After his crimes, he would search the victims, taking money, valuables, and even ordinary household items like scissors. The scale and brutality of his crimes made him one of the most dangerous serial killers in the Soviet Union. His first murder had been driven by emotion, but over time, killing became a routine. He claimed that each act of murder gave him relief from his depression. Deep inside, he carried a burning resentment toward women, perhaps rooted in the rejection he faced during his childhood. He admitted that he took pleasure in watching his victims struggle. Sexual assault was a constant element in his crimes, and he often chose highways and rural motorways for his attacks, making it easier for him to escape. One of the strangest aspects of his life was that he served as a volunteer in the People's Druzhina, a force that assisted the police. Ironically, this meant he was sometimes involved in the very investigations of his own crimes. During these checks, he even joined officers in stopping and inspecting Red Zaporozhet's cars, cleverly using the information to change his methods and avoid suspicion. In the Soviet era, the very idea of a serial killer was considered a Western concept. Because of this, the police treated the murders as separate, unrelated cases. But by the 1980s, as the crimes escalated, a special investigator named Nikolai Ignatovich began to suspect that they were all the work of a single man. The greatest failure of the investigation was that 14 innocent people were sentenced for his crimes. Under immense pressure to solve the cases, the police resorted to brutal interrogations, forcing false confessions out of suspects. For example, in this tragic miscarriage of justice, several innocent men were punished for crimes they never committed. In 1974, O.P. Glushakov was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In 1980, N.S. Tyreniev was executed. Vigorilov lost his eyesight while serving 6 years behind bars. And Oleg Adamov was given 15 years, eventually attempting suicide. Their suffering was the price of the system's desperation to close the cases. A driver's house was raided 8 times, and in the last raid, a victim's photograph was planted, pushing him to the point of attempting suicide. Investigator Mikhail Zianirovich, known as the Belarusian Sherlock Holmes, solved 100% of his cases, but through torture. This revealed the corruption of the Soviet system. In 1985, as the investigation intensified, Gennady devised a cunning trick. He sent an anonymous letter to a local newspaper claiming to be a member of a fictional group called the Patriots of Vitebsk. In the letter, he wrote that they would continue killing communists and immoral women. He left handwritten notes beside his last 2 victims. One read, "Death to the unfaithful," and another said, "Fight the police and the communists." These notes, written in his own hand, would later lead to his arrest. Investigators analyzed the handwriting from the letter and the notes. In total, they compared samples from more than 556,000 men. At last, Gennady's handwriting matched. On December 9th, 1985, he was arrested at his brother's house. At the time of his arrest, he was visibly anxious, repeatedly asking the officers to stop the car so he could relieve himself. During the search of his home, investigators uncovered belongings of his victims, including a hidden well where he had concealed many of their possessions. At first, he denied everything, claiming he had been kidnapped and forced to write the letter. But under intense interrogation, he finally confessed. He admitted to 43 murders and described the details himself. Psychologists declared him a psychopath, but not insane. He took pride in his crimes, boasting that he would become famous nationwide, like Dennis Rader. In his trial, he was convicted of 36 murders and sentenced to death. In the Soviet Union, executions were carried out by firing squad. On September 25, 1987, he was executed, though some sources claim it happened on February 3, 1988. His death marked the end of an era, but it also exposed the failures of the Soviet system. The officers responsible for the wrongful convictions were later punished. Gennady's life stands as a warning of how someone who appears normal on the outside can, in reality, be a monster within. His story reflects violence, deep psychological scars, and the deceptive masks people wear in society.